Hi friends, welcome to another video lecture for Greek exegesis of Revelation. The title of this lecture is The Unveiling of Evil in Revelation 12 through 14. In this lecture, I want to consider Revelation 12 through 14 as a literary unit and what Eugene Boring calls the exposé of the powers of evil. After sort of introducing this section as a unit, I want to outline the cast of characters that we see in these chapters, and then dig deep on the counterfeit trinity, an idea that I get from Eugene Boring's commentary, and then talk about the visions of victory in chapter 14, and then say a few words about the unveiling of evil in this part of Revelation. Eugene Boring, in his commentary on Revelation, suggests that Revelation 12:1 through 14:20 is a single literary unit. It's best understood together. And so although I've already done a lecture on Revelation 12, I want to treat 12, 13, and 14 together as a unit. So there will be some aspects of review, obviously. Boring describes this part of Revelation as a surrealistic drama that is best engaged with our imagination and insight rather than our critical analysis or historical analysis, maybe. He argues that this passage is both the central axis of the book and the core of its pictorial argument. It is, in other words, a central part of the book of Revelation. He says that Revelation 12 through 14 provides a behind-the-scenes panorama of the world as it is. And panorama means a vision of everything. And so in Revelation 12 through 14, we see a vision of everything from pre-creation to the end of time. And one of the major functions of this section is the unveiling of the powers of evil that are at work in the present moment. Turning now to the cast of characters in this surrealistic drama, we first have Revelation's heroes. We've already talked about a few of these, and so I can review them quickly. There is, of course, the woman in Revelation 12 who has this polyvalent nature, can represent Mary, the mother of Jesus, but also the church and Eve, and even the Queen of Heaven. Then there is the Messiah who is born to the woman. Clearly, this is a reference to Jesus, who will rule with an iron rod. Not an image of violence, but an image rather of the power of suffering love revealed in the cross. There are the brethren of the Messiah, the Christians, the brethren of the Messiah, therefore also children of the woman. These are the object of the dragon's attacks and the war and the persecution. Boring notes that the earth is also a character in this drama, not just a scene for where it plays out, but that the earth itself acts by protecting the woman and swallowing up the dragon. We also see Michael and the other angels who are named, and I've put here on the slide the variety of places where the angels act, because it's an important thing. This is a reflection of God's delegated authority, that the angels act almost on God's behalf. And then we see God, and Boring, I think, rightly says that God is at once the hidden actor, but the real direct actor, right? So God doesn't act directly in the narrative, but there are a number of places where a divine passive is used in Greek. It was given, or it was permitted, or so on and so forth. And this ultimately says that God is the mover behind all of these actions. God is over all of these actions, even as God delegates these to other characters. With an idea of these heroes in the story, then we can turn to the foes, Revelation's foes. And again, we've talked already about the dragon. I'll say a few words of review about that. But then there is also the beast from the sea and the beast from the land. It is these three characters that Eugene Boring describes as the counterfeit trinity. And I want to say more about that next. The first member of this counterfeit trinity is the dragon that we encounter in chapter 12. As a review, remember that the portrait of this dragon is is similar in many ways to Paul's notion of trans-individual, suprapersonal powers of evil. At least that's what Boring says. And Boring even points us to Ephesians 6 in the description of those trans-individual, suprapersonal powers. Boring suggests that the piling up of names in 12:9 leads to the conclusion that the dragon is really a symbol of all anti-God forces from Eden and beyond. All anti-God forces. So it's a cumulative effect. It's a composite. And in many ways, the dragon is a parody of God. It is just like God does, the dragon grants power to the other beasts in chapter 13. Just like God, the dragon seeks to receive worship from human beings. And so there's this interesting parallel between the dragon on the one hand and God, part of this counterfeit or evil trinity. The other two members of the counterfeit trinity are the two beasts, the beast that arises from the sea and the beast that arises from the land. And before speaking about how they're portrayed in chapter 13 specifically, I wanted to provide some background for you. First, we learn about both of these beasts or monsters in the Old Testament, especially the book of Job. There are more references to Leviathan, so we see Leviathan mentioned in Job as well as in Psalms, but Behemoth is only mentioned in 40. Now, in none of these verses are Leviathan or Behemoth necessarily opposed to God. In fact, they're creations of God. And Job has this great image of making Leviathan his plaything, of taming it like a puppy or something like that. But when we turn to other Jewish literature, in between the time the Old Testament was written and the New Testament was written, we begin to see a different portrait of Leviathan and Behemoth. So one example is First Enoch, chapter 60. We learn about these two monsters. It describes them as two monsters. A female named Leviathan, who dwells in the abyss of the ocean, and another, a male named Behemoth, who holds in his chest an invisible desert. So the water and the land, Behemoth is the land beast and Leviathan is the water beast. Or in another apocalyptic text, 2 Baruch 29, it says, "And Behemoth will reveal itself from its place, and Leviathan will come from the sea, the two great monsters which I created on the fifth day of creation, and which I have kept until that time." So these two monsters, according to 2 Baruch, are not independent of God. They are a part of God's creation after the fifth day. And they will rise up at an appointed time, according to 2 Baruch. And here is a longer quotation from the book of 2nd Esdras or 4th Ezra. It has a very complicated textual history, but let's just call it these two titles for now. And again, after the fifth day of creation, this is the context, verse 49 of chapter 6 says, "Then you kept in existence, you being God, two living creatures, the one you called Behemoth, and the name of the other Leviathan. And you separated one from the other, for the seventh part where the water had been gathered together could not hold them both. And you gave Behemoth one of the parts that had been dried up on the third day," so land, "to live in it, where there are 1,000 mountains. But to Leviathan you gave the seventh part, the watery part, and you have kept them to be eaten by whom you wish and when you wish." So we have these images of these two beasts that are objects of God's creation, and yet in the apocalyptic imagination are monstrous. And we'll see that in the book of Revelation, this becomes even more problematic. They become more enemies or foes of God in the portrait of Revelation. So returning to chapter 13 of Revelation, the first beast that we meet is the beast that arises from the sea. Again, I think if we're thinking about Job and Psalms, or we're thinking about this early Jewish literature, there's a clear allusion here to Leviathan, the beast. And the description of this beast, with its horns and its body parts and all of that, is really a reference to the beasts in Daniel 7. And Boren, I think, rightly says that this is a sort of composite picture of these symbolic beasts from Daniel 7 and from the Leviathan. And because of this connection with Daniel 7, this idea of a beast then representing a historical empire comes through. And there are Jews who thought that the fourth beast of Revelation represented Rome. And so we see perhaps some of that coming in Revelation 13. Revelation 13 says that this beast has blasphemous names. And I think we can take this as a reference to imperial propaganda that declared that the emperor was the Son of God, or the Lord, or the creator of the earth, or the bringer of peace. There's also a reference to a death blow. One of the parts of the beast from the sea receives a death blow, and it's very likely that this is a reference to a sort of a myth that was circulating in the Roman Empire in the middle of the first century, that Nero had died. Nero actually committed suicide, but that he had been resurrected, or he had been reincarnated maybe in a subsequent emperor. And so in many ways, the beast from the sea represents a parody of Christ. So just like Christ, the beast from the sea receives power, not from God, but from the dragon. The beast from the sea is presented as being slaughtered or having a death wound, but yet alive, just like Christ is the one who is slaughtered and yet alive. The beast also conquers, just like Christ, although in a very different way. Just like Christ, the beast rules, has been delegated a ruling authority, just like Christ has in taking a seat next to the one who sits on the throne in Revelation 4 and 5. And then in Revelation 13:8, if this isn't clear enough, the author describes sort of two options: those who align themselves with the way of the Lord and the Lamb, or those who align themselves with the way of the beast that rises from the sea. And so again, we're getting this language of this counterfeit trinity, a parody, an uncreative sort of mirror image of the Holy Trinity. The third and final element of this trinity is the beast on the land. And again, the beast on the land looks like Christ because it has the horns like a lamb, but it sounds like the dragon. It speaks the words of the dragon. It doesn't speak the words of God, and that's important. We can think of the beast on the land as almost like a hype person from the beast from the sea, a promoter, a compeller, a persuader to human beings to sort of align themselves with the way of the beast from the sea, or to worship the beast from the sea. He's depicted as a fake Elijah, able to do signs and call down fire from heaven, and ultimately promotes false worship. And so this third beast is the parody of the Holy Spirit, or if we would prefer, the spirit of prophecy. Remember, the spirit of prophecy is mentioned, and witnessing and prophecy are the same in Revelation. And this is what humans do on earth, right? Followers of the Lamb are witnesses to the Lamb. They are prophesiers of the Lamb. And so the beast on the land is doing the mirror image of that, the reverse of that. They are witnessing and promoting the worship, not of God, but of the beast that arises from the sea. They encourage, their preaching enables the hearers to find access and protection to the economic and cultural norms of the day. But the spirit of prophecy, or the spirit of God, makes human hearers experience a disconnect and tension with those cultural norms. Scholars have debated who this is, whether it's Roman officials or even a council of local officials that maybe are more local in nature. So Boren describes them as indigenous leaders of the Roman Empire. Or are they priests of the imperial religion, or even are they false teachers from within early Christianity? And I think Eugene Boring's conclusion is actually apt. He says the beast has characteristic of all of these. All who support and promote the cultural religion in or out of the church, however lamb-like they may appear, are agents of the beast. All propaganda that entices humanity to idolize human empire is an expression of this beastly power that wants to appear lamb-like. I think that is so vital, this generalizing word that Eugene Boring offers, that any propaganda that entices humanity to idolize human empire, and the degree to which this human empire can be made to seem lamb-like, is nevertheless an expression of beastly power. I think that has a word for us today, if we are willing to see it. So that's the counterfeit trinity. A quick word about chapter 14. Chapter 14 provides the visions of victory. Boring again calls these the behind-the-scenes view of victory. The HarperCollins Study Bible describes this chapter as containing 3 loosely connected visions dealing with eschatological judgment and salvation. So we have the vision of the Lamb and the 144,000 in the first 5 verses. Then we have these 3 angelic messages in verses 6 through 13, and a vision of judgment, usually understood as alluding to Joel 3:13 in verses 14 through 20. And so, again, one of the things that Revelation 12 through 14 does is it unveils evil, but it also unveils victory. It provides access to a behind-the-scenes victory, an assured victory, a promised victory, a guaranteed victory that is nevertheless not yet realized. Again, that already and not yet perspective of Revelation. Let me conclude by saying more about this unveiling of evil and how we might understand it as contemporary Christians. So I think what Revelation 12 through 14, and we'll see it again in subsequent chapters as well, but it unveils evil, and it presents evil as powerful, pervasive, and persuasive. So evil is powerful. There's no denying its power. It is pervasive. It has made its ways into human systems, human policies, human economies, and human empires. And it's persuasive. There's a spirit, there's a hype person or rhetoric or messaging that is demanding that others align themselves with this way. But, and I think this is important, the opposite is also true. Revelation presents evil as dependent, limited, and ultimately uncreative. So as horrendous and horrible as these beasts may be, ultimately they're dependent, and their time is limited, and their rule is limited, and they're ultimately just a poor parody of divine goodness and the divine Trinity. I think there's wisdom in Revelation's revealing evil as monstrous, as superhuman, suprahuman, trans-individual. These are anti-God forces. These are bigger than individuals. I think they're bigger than individual governments or empires. This is a much more broad and monstrous reality. And finally, evil very often is hidden and masked. It needs an unveiling. It lies behind the surface. It's not always obvious, in other words. But I also think, as we read this material, there is a caution for us as interpreters and teachers of Scripture. And so the first is, I think that it's just as dangerous to read this text literally as it is to read it in a hope of sort of decoding every detail in order to see in our contemporary world who is the beast from the sea or who is the beast from the land. I don't think that that's the point, the decoding, or to read it literally. I think it's an unveiling of how evil works, not necessarily a who, or it's a revelation of what is evil like, instead of a who is the evil one. I also think we need to avoid both the devil made me do it understanding of evil and absolute resignation, right? There's a sense in which, the devil is given way too much power in Christian discourse. And then there's another sense in which, well, if the devil's so powerful, might as well just stop trying. And so again, I think we sort of navigate those two realities. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I think we need to be cautious in connecting historical empires or governments as if they are themselves the anti-God forces, instead of their propensity to being led by or persuaded by or deceived by these anti-God forces. I think it's a really subtle difference, and it's a nuance that we need to be careful with, that doesn't necessarily equate a historical figure or a historical kingdom with the forces of evil, but sees those human systems, those human governments, as susceptible to the anti-God forces. But ultimately that evil is something independent and over those things. Well, I hope that this lecture has been stimulating. I hope that it gets you thinking differently about Revelation 12 through 14, and I hope even that it might cause you to post about it or to have a conversation with me about it. But thank you, as always, for your time and your attention.